In the news tonight, His Majesty the King holds talks with the European Union foreign policy chief and calls for a political solution in Syria. A Jordanian soldier is killed in a clash with an armed group that tried to cross the border from Syria. And at least 7 people are killed in gun battles in Beirut and Tripoli in further unrest linked to the conflict in Syria. Good evening and welcome to a new edition of the news. Here are the details. His Majesty the King meets various national activists and popular figures during a royal court audience tomorrow. The meeting is in line with the King's reach out to all Jordanians across the social and political spectrums. His Majesty the King discussed with European Union Foreign Policy Chief Catherine Ashton ways of cementing Jordanian-EU ties through a partnership agreement signed about 10 years ago. King Abdullah hailed EU support of Jordan's development programs and projects as part of the kingdom's advanced status with the bloc. His Majesty briefed Ashton on Jordan's reforms and hailed EU support of the reform drive, whose goal is to achieve a better future for all Jordanians. On the regional political scene, King Abdullah reiterated that a political solution has to be found to the Syrian crisis that maintains the country's unity. He said the kingdom had to exert a huge effort to provide relief services to Syrian refugees who had fled to the country. King Abdullah and Ashton also talked about efforts to breathe new life into the Palestinian-Israeli peace process to find a solution that addresses final issues and lead to an independent Palestinian state on 1967 borders. Ashton, who is on a regional tour, said the Jordanian-EU partnership is strategic, pledging EU support of the kingdom's reform and modernization programs. She also referred to EU aid to help Jordan to continue services to Syrian refugees. EU Foreign Policy Chief Ashton is on a 5-day tour of the region. After her talks with His Majesty the King, she visited Syrian refugees in Zatri camp. She will travel on to Lebanon tomorrow. Ashton is the latest high-profile official to visit the Zatri camp. Iman Majali has a story.
European Union Foreign Policy Chief Catherine Ashton sees the plight of Syrian refugees firsthand. Ashton visited the Zatari refugee camp in the kingdom's north, home to more than 30,000 refugees, and praised the efforts of those working on the ground for its Syrian inhabitants. During her tour, she visited a makeshift school operated by the United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, and spoke to teachers and students and delivered some school supplies. The EU Foreign Policy Chief praised the international agencies, the Jordanian government, and local communities for supporting the displaced families.
I just want to pay tribute to everyone who's working so hard to make the terrible situation of the Syrian refugees as bearable as possible.
Commenting on a temporary ceasefire proposed by UN Arab League envoy to Syria, Lakhdar Ibrahimi, Ashton said the international community must trust his efforts. She said the veteran diplomat is doing everything in his power to end the devastating civil war.
I had the good fortune of spending time with Mr. Ibrahimi. I was recently in New York, and we keep in touch. And I think his first priority is to try and find ways to stop the fighting and to try and find ways in which the people can come together. And of course, we have to support him in that.
Human rights activists say the conflict, which has drawn in regional and international powers backing different sides, has killed more than 30,000 people since the start of the conflict. Hundreds of thousands of Syrians have fled the increasingly bloody conflict, only to end up in refugee camps like this one. Iman al-Majali for the news at 10.
A Jordanian soldier was killed last night in a clash with an armed group that tried to breach the border with Syria. The armed forces said its martyr, Corporal Muhammad Abdullah al-Manasir, died when troops clashed with a group of 8 armed men that tried to cross the frontier at 10:30 last night. His officers joined hundreds of mourners at the soldier's funeral in his home village of Tel Rumman in the Balqa governorate. The funeral was held with full military honors. Earlier in a statement, the Armed Forces General Command said all the armed demonstrators were arrested, along with 8 AK-47 Kalashnikov assault rifles and an AG-3 submachine gun. The source also said at around midnight, another armed hardline Takfiri group of 5 men attempted to cross the border and clashed with troops. It said a member of the second was seriously injured, adding that by the early hours of today, all 5 men had been arrested and Kalashnikovs and revolvers in their possession seized. The statement mourned the soldier as a martyr and vowed it will continue defending the country's borders and hit with an iron fist anyone trying to undermine national security and stability. The government said members of an al-Qaeda-linked group arrested by security forces were Jordanians. The group of about a dozen militants were arrested before carrying out a plot to bomb vital targets in Amman, including shopping malls and foreign diplomats. The uncovering of the terror plot has brought public relief and plaudits for security forces, the readiness and promptness. Leith Janqiti has a story.
An al-Qaeda terror plot in Jordan falls apart, with all 11 members ending up in custody. Security forces foiled the bombing plot in the making by an al-Qaeda-linked cell to destabilize the kingdom's security. The group had for over 4 months planned to bomb shopping centers and assassinate Western diplomats, among other targets. These pictures have been published by the General Intelligence Department for the group members, who masterminded the botched attacks in the capital Amman, in which smuggled weapons and explosives from Syria were used. Western and commercial centers were the main targets by the group, which had the intent to inflict as many casualties and mayhem as possible. Minister of State for Media Affairs and Communications, Samih Ma'aita, said all the suspects are Jordanian.
There are 11 terrorists. They all hold the Jordanian nationality. Their pictures were displayed on Jordan TV and are available on news agencies along with their full names. This case was transferred to the District Attorney of the State Security Court. This case is under the jurisdiction of the Jordanian courts. The weapons used explosives, mortars, and there were rifles. We have distributed a news item containing details of the full plan, including target locations.
The foiling of the plot brought nationwide relief and praise for security apparatuses, in particular the General Intelligence Department, for defending the country and protecting lives and property.
Our military institutions and security apparatuses are of top quality and the reputation is outstanding. We thank them and tell them how proud we are.
The capture of the militants was also hailed by political parties, grassroots leaders, and public figures.
Jordan is still targeted for its moderate stance. Despite being a target, it is a safe country, with its security apparatuses working day and night to protect and safeguard this nation.
The terror bombings were meant to coincide with the bloody 2005 attacks in 3 Amman hotels. Jordan has often been targeted by al-Qaeda and other militants and has regularly arrested terror suspects and put them on trial. Leith Janqiti for the News at 10.
A cleanup operation is underway in Aqaba after a torrential downpour flooded streets and caused havoc in the southern port city. 2 people were killed, a 10-year-old girl and a 55-year-old man. The rainstorm has touched off flash floods, sending mud and debris pouring from hills onto the streets and sweeping cars in their way. The worst hit areas were Aqaba's Shalala and 9th District. Officials blamed poor drainage facilities and partially completed road projects for the floods. A panel has been named to assess the damage to the city's infrastructure. At least 7 people were killed and dozens wounded in gun battles in the Lebanese capital Beirut and the second city of Tripoli. The clashes have stoked fears that Syria's civil war is now spreading into Lebanon, pitting pro- and anti-Syrian groups against each other. Luay Balqa reports on the latest tension.
The killing of an intelligence officer in a Beirut car bomb has thrown Lebanon into a fresh crisis. The latest tension exposed political and sectarian rifts, highlighting the country's vulnerability to conflict in neighboring Syria and raising fear of more assassinations. In its first public statement, the Sudanese Army Command urged political leaders to be cautious so as not to inflame passions further. It said the country is going through a decisive and critical time, and the level of tension in some regions is rising to unprecedented levels. The assassination of General Wissam al-Hassan, the country's internal security, has triggered outrage across the country, with many pointing a finger at Damascus. Fighting occurred on the edge of the Tariq al-Jdeida, and residents reported heavy gunfire elsewhere in the capital Beirut. A convoy of armored personnel carrier was deployed on the streets between the pro- and anti-Syrian areas. The government is trying to re-establish calm and prevent more trouble in Qasqas, where protesters use garbage containers and burning tires to block roads.
We got rid of gunmen in the roadblocks. I was going to work when gunmen stopped me, and if the army had not intervened, I would have been beaten. The least they could have done. We are happy that the army is in control now.
In Tripoli, gunmen have been walking the streets with rifles and rocket-propelled grenades and exchanged fire in the northern city. At least 5 people were killed in Tripoli, where buildings and houses were set on fire. Prime Minister Najib Mikati has offered to resign to make way for a government of national unity, but President Michel Suleiman persuaded him to stay in office to time for talks on a way out of the political crisis. Louay Balkar for the news at 10.
The Arab League said there is a slim chance for a ceasefire in Syria over the Eid al-Adha holiday later this week. United Nations and Arab League envoy to Syria Lakhdar has been pushing for the temporary ceasefire. Syrian President Bashar al-Assad has told Brahimi the key to any political solution was to stop the arming of the rebels. But regime forces continued attacks on rebels in flashpoint provinces and cities. Khaled Dababne has more on the conflict.
Little hope for agreement on a ceasefire between Syria's rebels and the government of President Bashar al-Assad. UN and Arab League envoy to Syria Lakhdar Brahimi has been pushing for a temporary ceasefire to mark the Islamic festival of Eid al-Adha, which will begin on Friday and last over the weekend. Assad told Brahimi the key to any political solution is to stop the arming of the rebels. While talks were underway, a car bomb exploded near a police station in the mainly Christian central Babtuma district of the capital, killing at least 13 people and injuring 29 others. Another bomb struck the city of Aleppo. Latest videos show the aftermath of shelling as the dead and wounded are carried away from the scene into nearby vehicles. Men were carrying bodies while others were trying to clear access to the vehicles surrounded by people. Around noon, government forces were battling rebel groups from an old building near the blast site, leading to civilians fleeing. The crossfire lasted about 20 minutes before the government forces regained control of the area. Syrian rebel battalions from the Yusuf al-Adma brigade in Idlib have surrounded a military encampment on the Syrian-Turkish border for 4 days.
The Free Syrian Army is surrounding the regime army. They don't have any chance of escape. They're completely cut off. This is the 4th day they have been under siege. They're surrounded. That's the Turkish border and the Syrian border. And there's a roadblock. The FSA is controlling the
The Free Syrian Army fighters said they are trying to put pressure on the camp's approximately 150 soldiers to surrender. Russia, meanwhile, urged the Syrian government and all opposition groups to accept Brahimi's proposal. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov called the truce a necessary step towards a long-term ceasefire and the launch of a political process aimed at providing for a Syrian democratic renewal. Khaled Dababne for the news at 10.
2 Palestinians were killed in an Israeli raid in the northern Gaza Strip. 2 others were injured. One of the dead men was identified as a member of Hamas. An Israeli army statement said the attack was in retaliation for mortar bombs fired at Israeli troops from inside Gaza's border fence. It said Israeli aircraft targeted a rocket launching squad in the Gaza Strip and confirmed a direct hit. Hundreds of Palestinian mourners marched through the streets of Beit Lahia in northern Gaza in a funeral processions for the 2 men. In a meeting with Middle East Quartet envoy Tony Blair, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu vowed to stop the rocket attacks.
Rockets, Hamas, supported by Iran, firing rockets at us. They fired again. We're not going to let anyone arm themselves and fire rockets on us and think that they can do this with impunity. They're not going to get away with it. We attacked them before, we attacked them after, and we're going to keep them from arming themselves. This is our policy. This is a very different policy that I've put in. You don't let them get away with it, and they know it. That's what we're doing.
Tonight is the third and final debate between U.S. President Barack Obama and his Republican challenger, Mitt Romney. During the 90-minute encounter at Lynn University in Boca Raton, Florida, the two candidates will be turning to foreign policy. Romney's missteps in criticizing Obama's handling of a deadly attack on the U.S. diplomatic mission in Benghazi have complicated his broader strategy of trying to cast the president as a weak steward of American power abroad. Obama can score points by painting Romney as a foreign policy novice who's not prepared to lead on the world stage. So far, the two men are tied at 47% support each among likely voters, with just over 2 weeks to go before the election.
This is the most difficult area for someone who doesn't deal with these issues every day. And if President Obama can pull back that curtain and say, this man's not ready for the job, he hasn't prepared, he doesn't know the issues well enough, that's damning for a challenger.
Lance Armstrong was stripped of his 7 Tour de France titles and banned for life after the International Cycling Union, UCI, ratified the United States Anti-Doping Agency's sanctions against him. During a press conference, the UCI president said Lance Armstrong has no place in cycling. Earlier this month, the Anti-Doping Agency published a report into Armstrong, which alleged the now-retired rider had been involved in the most sophisticated, personalized and successful doping program sport has ever seen. Once widely accepted as one of the greatest cyclists of all time, given he fought back from cancer to dominate the sport, Armstrong has always denied doping and says he has never failed a doping test.
This is a landmark day for cycling. Cycling indeed has endured a lot of pain as it has absorbed the impact of the USADA report. The UCI promised to prioritise our analysis of the report and to provide an early response, and we've done that. My message to cycling, to our riders, to our sponsors and to our fans today is cycling has a future. The UCI wishes to begin that journey on that path forward today by confirming that it will not appeal to the Court of Arbitration for Sport, that it will recognise the sanction that USADA has imposed. The UCI will ban Lance Armstrong from cycling, and the UCI will strip him of his 7 Tour de France titles. Lance Armstrong has no place in cycling.
The Circuit of the Americas officially opened in Texas with former American Formula One great Mario Andretti and a Lotus 79 on hand to help rake it in. The track will host the U.S. Grand Prix on November 18. Andretti was scheduled to drive the first official laps around the circuit in a current Lotus F1 car, but when the car broke down, a local stepped up with his privately owned Lotus 79 and Andretti took to the track. The 20-turn, 5.5-kilometer circuit cost $300 million. And now over to what the weather has in store. Partly cloudy tonight with possible scattered showers and southeasterly moderate winds. Tomorrow it'll be mild with temperatures remaining around seasonal average. The Gulf of Aqaba should expect a fair day with northerly moderate winds and calm seas. Here now is a look at temperatures forecast for tonight and tomorrow. And to close, his reminder of the day's top stories. His Majesty the King holds talks with the European Union foreign policy chief and calls for a political solution in Syria. A Jordanian soldier is killed in a clash with an armed group that tried to cross the border from Syria. And at least people are killed in gun battles in Beirut and Tripoli in further unrest linked to the conflict in Syria. And with this, we come to the end of this edition of the news. I'm Alia Tuqan. Thank you for joining us and have a good night.